the therapeutic stance is, again, like what the stuff that you do. You're warm, you're connecting, you're wanting to be involved. You're really, though, focusing on goals, really working to make important connections with them, continue to make those important connections with them, and redirecting issues related to eating. So again, this is the reason why this comes up all the time is sometimes with eating disorders, people want to focus on what they ate. I ate this or I ate that, or oh, I ate all these cookies, or I ate this or I ate that, or and get into the minutia of the eating behavior rather than what was driving the eating behavior. That is getting back into what we discussed. Remember, you have because you're right now, it's like you're really focusing on the content of the food, but really remember what happens from what we've talked about is that when you're feeling really distressed about your relationships, or when you're feeling really distressed about this, you have a tendency to really be more focused on your food. So why don't you tell me what happened this week? How was it this week, in terms of your eating? What was going on? What was driving that this week? So it's really getting them refocused in terms of the symptoms. Now, the difficulty that you have with this where you have to be a good salesman or saleswoman or salesperson is that this is where you're going to run into difficulties, either both for yourself or for working with others, because no one wants to deal with the stark reality of the time limitation in treatment. And even though you only have 9 sessions, you don't want to feel bound by those 9 sessions. And so theoretically and psychologically, you're still wanting to attend to all of these other things. And where you have to get people thinking about is that this is great. You can focus on this if you want to. But when you focus on these things, you're not focusing on this, and so consequently the thing that they came in for is not being addressed. And so, and unfortunately, that's the unfortunate reality. And then the next thing you know, the semester's over, it's the break, they've left, they're gone. You focused on all these things, but you didn't really get to what you needed to get to. And so that's really that's what makes the struggle in the intermediate phase a struggle, is that, and you can see that in a longer therapy how much more challenging that would be, or how much more freedom you would have if you have, let's say, 6 sessions for a middle phase. So if you have 4, 6, 4, or if you had 4, 8, and 3, then all of a sudden you're talking about it's a different animal. Because then you can afford the luxury of kind of like veering off now and again. But with this one, you can't. And so then when you're getting people thinking about it from a training perspective, or from your perspective as well, just doing it, it's like you almost have to just like keep saying to yourself, gotta stay focused on the symptom profile. And it's not focusing on the symptom per se, it's focusing on the relationship of the symptom to the work they're doing in the interpersonal goal that you have identified with them, and the interpersonal problem area that you've identified. Because you've already done the work, you made the link, you made the connection. You were here, you made the connection. Your depression is related to your grandfather's death. It's compounded by the fact that you have a tendency to take care of other people and don't take care of yourself. Boom, we have the problem. So then the task is that then every session, how's it going? How did it go this week? How's your mood this week? Who have you been reaching out to? Who have you been connecting with? Then you can talk about the relationship. You can talk about a boyfriend. You talk about somebody you met. How's it going? How are you been feeling? What's been going on in class? But you always have to kind of like, you have to be willing to pay your toll to the interpersonal gods and make sure you're making the connection with the symptom profile. And like, where are they? How are they doing? What did they do different this week? How did it go? What was different from last week? How do they want to be focusing on that? Then you can also you also have the luxury though too of still going back, and because one of the things that's cool is that then you still have the luxury, if you want to, because I do this all the time because I love doing it, is that you have the opportunity to indulge a little bit in, you can still say, okay, so you get a current, what's going on with the symptoms, what's going on, how are they doing this week with their interpersonal relationships, okay? Met with this person, talked with this person, blah, 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 blah. you can still then have access to all this cool material that you have back here. So if there's something pertinent that you want to draw in and find out more information about, you want to talk more about the situation with, because again, something's going to come up with a girlfriend or with a teacher, back then it seems like years ago you really were struggling with this, but it seems like you're not having as much of a difficult time with this now. How's that changed? What's different about that? Or issues with the parents, well, what do your parents think about that? Oh, blah, 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 and so that then you're always, kind of like, sometimes I've conceptualized it. So let's say this is the therapy. Here's our past. So really, you work in the context of therapy. You've really pulled from this past interpersonal inventory, the inventory of interpersonal problems or the interpersonal inventory, and you're really helping them take what's going on in therapy and transferring it to their outside social network, taking that information and bringing it back in. So the work is here, but you can continue to pull up what's relevant to the therapy work and continue to relate it to the outside current social network. So it's really this dynamic flux. You're not going backwards. Some people sometimes this idea of going backwards to go forwards, but my feeling about it has always been, in terms of this issue about the past or kind of psychoanalytic, stuff, and even like the stuff with the abuse, it's like, do we need to go backwards to go forwards? I don't know, but I always feel like that sometimes if we can work on some of these issues currently, my experience has been this kind of backwards domino effect. That you have this, it's not like you're rewriting a narrative. I'm not like a big narrative therapy guy, but it's like you're really getting them to think differently, have a different perspective on the way in which their life is unfolded. These unfortunate interpersonal events that have occurred in their life, and they're actively working to make changes in the way in which they interact with the world. And that's really the therapeutic task as you're working on the goals. But then what happens is that it has this kind of lovely backwards domino effect where then all of a sudden the historical issues become more enlightened in some way. There's more perspective, there's more meaning, there's more understanding. This is the way, again, like with analytic therapy, it's like, well, this is the way that I am, but then there's no change that's associated with it. But really with IPT, what we're really doing is we're asking people to make changes in their way in which they function interpersonally and with their relationships as a way to kind of, in some respects, again, not necessarily rewrite, but to gain perspective on why they've been struggling. Why have they been having an eating disorder? Why have they been so depressed? It makes perfect sense, of course. Who wouldn't? But what's happened as a result of that, your current life is so strained, your relationships are strained, you don't have any relationships. And so what we need to do is if we help you to make meaningful connections with other people, it's going to have a sweeping impact on the way in which you feel about yourself, and also it's going to have an impact on the way in which you manage your food, you manage your affect, or you manage all these other things. So really that's then becomes the work of the intermediate phase, is this constant ongoing work, but if you get off task, you can see where all of a sudden it waters down the effectiveness of the treatment because of the short-term nature of it. So that's why I keep pushing people, and it's tough because I'm such a yakmeister and I'm always interested in so many things that's why it's so difficult sometimes to maintain that focus on the connections of things. That's why it's great when you have like a checklist, a symptom checklist, like what their binges were like over the past week, and use that as a stepping off place, to kind of like kind of reinitiate, engage the treatment. So.